Hello everyone, and welcome back to Replay, where games are art. So, the trio of Sabin, Shadow, and Cian have now moved on from Doma into the Phantom Forest, which is a pretty traditional haunted forest kind of a thing. But there's actually some interesting stuff going on here in terms of the characters, because I want to address a concept called liminality. Liminal comes from limnus. I'm probably mispronouncing that word, but it's the Latin word for a threshold, a doorstep. And the idea of liminality is that it's the border between one thing and another thing. Liminality is that ambiguous state where you're becoming. You've stopped being what you were, but you're not yet what you will be. And liminal spaces are spaces that, generally speaking, are not destinations in themselves. They're places you pass through on some kind of a journey, especially like a spiritual journey. And forests are very much a liminal space. Traditionally, forests have always been places of dread, menacing kinds of places, hazards that you pass through to try to get from point A to point B. And in the background, we see the Phantom Train. Trains are another good example of a liminal space. Any kind of form of transportation is, because you don't go to a train, you ride a train to get from one place to another. The function of the train is to exist in between. Roads are also traditional liminal spaces, which is why a lot of stories begin at a roadside inn, because that's a liminal space. It's somewhere you're passing through. So why is this important? Well, like I was saying, liminal spaces in particular are a kind of spiritual journey. And that, in a very real sense, is what is happening here, because these three characters have something in common. We haven't seen it for Shadow yet, but all three of these characters are in mourning. They have all lost people and not really had an opportunity to deal with that loss. And mourning is a liminal space. Mourning is the space between having someone in our lives and accepting that they are no longer in our lives. When you're in mourning, there's a hole in the world, and that hole never completely leaves. It always leaves a scar, but it still eventually does heal. It becomes a scar instead of a hole. A person's absence never stops hurting, you never stop missing them, but it becomes a part of who you now are, as opposed to being a foreign, alien thing that you have to deal with. It is dealt with once you've passed through the liminal space of mourning, which can take a long time. I mean, the implication is that Sabin has been in mourning for his parents, and in a sense for his brother, for years. So, that brings us to this Phantom Train, which I absolutely love. It's something that takes you through another liminal journey between being alive and being dead. It is itself, trains are always thresholds, but this particular train is the threshold between life and death. So, they're in a liminal space where they don't belong. And that's interesting to me, because being here on the border between life and death, while all three of them are trying to deal with accepting deaths that have entered their lives, it makes sense. It fits their stories and their journeys. So as we pass through this segment of the game, I want to try to look at it as being a kind of spiritual journey. So, as you saw while I was nattering on, we've got here this impresario character. I think he's supposed to be a conductor. I think that's a mistranslation. A conductor is very similar to a theater impresario in terms of their role. So, ish. Oh, I love that the time schedules are blank. Because, yeah, they don't need a schedule. Their schedule is fate itself. Their schedule is death. And death happens when it happens. It doesn't happen on a schedule. Which is part of what these characters need to accept. They need to accept that these things happened when they happened, could not have been predicted, could not have been prevented. They just are. Now, the other interesting thing that happens here is that one of the ghosts joins us. Actually, more than one, as you'll see. You know, eventually I'll get in a fight with enough enemies, like now, that he'll get to use... he, it, they, whatever, will get to use their, possession ability. Which is interesting. I'm pretty sure that ghost just possessed a ghost, which I guess causes a paradox and cancels them both out? I don't know. I do like that we're clearly passing through an underworld here. This train is going to places that living people should not be. And it's innately hostile to life. Oh good, this one wants to come with us. Some of the ghosts want to come with you, some of them attack you, some of them sell you stuff, and it's basically random. Okay, what are these guys? I'm sorry to interrupt myself, but what are these little wizard dudes? I don't even know. Is that thing in front of them an amulet, or are their hands folded together? Whatever. They're very strange. But what I think they are is basically hazards on the road from life to death. Very often, it's depicted as a dangerous journey, one with many perils, and a figure needs to guide you so that you can take that journey safely. Either people have to, protect you, that's why we have things like wakes, or there's a figure who guides you along the way, a psychopomp, as it's called. And as we'll see, there is one in this world. They just haven't shown up yet. Well, in a sense they have, but we haven't been introduced yet. Yeah, like I was saying, there are shops on the Train of the Dead. I guess, trains usually have someone who... I meant to buy 9, whatever. Trains usually have someone who sells you stuff, so sure. No, that one's attacking me. So like I was saying, these characters are on a journey. Shadow, I'll discuss later his losses, but for Sabin and Cian, their losses are fairly clear. Cian lost just recently his wife and son, and he needs to adjust to that, and this is an opportunity for him to do so. This being a video game, that opportunity involved lots of fights and some puzzles to solve, but, that is what it is. For Sabin, it's a little bit different, because Sabin's been living with his losses a lot longer, but the case I would make with Sabin is that he dealt with the loss of his parents by adopting a surrogate parent. That, Vargas seems to think that Duncan was closer to Sabin than to his own son. That kind of implies that there was, at the very least... Oh, I love this, and I'll talk about it in a second. But, like I was saying, at the very least, Sabin was some kind of mentor relationship, if not a full-on surrogate father, and he's now just lost that relationship. He's been uprooted from his home, separated from everyone he knows. His brother came back just in time to lose him again. So he's dealing with some losses too. And even more so, he's lost. That's another thing, that, wandering in a wood is a classic symbol of being spiritually lost. It's how Dante's Divine Comedy opens, for example, with him wandering through the woods as a metaphor for being lost in a spiritual sense. And he takes a guided tour of the afterlife and rediscovers where he's going. I think there's very much an extent to which that's happening here. But unfortunately, there's this chanting voice. You can't escape. You cannot get through this. It will always be like this. Not to get too personal, but that's a voice I know well. The voice that tells you that your loss, that your grief, that the hole in the world can never be closed. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. There is no escape. And that, I think, is why very often the dead ghosts seem to want company. Why they're so often murderous, is that feeling that we will be trapped between loss and going on with our lives, between the death and the life that comes after that death. And I'm talking here about the mourners, because all of our rituals and beliefs to do with death are about the people left behind. They're not about the dead, because they're dead. They are beyond anything we could do. They're about ourselves. And we ourselves are suspended between life and death when we're mourning, because a death just happened and we have yet to go on with our lives. So this is the fear that we will be mourning forever. This is that voice of depression that tries to hold you back, that tries to keep you from moving on with your life. Maybe that's because it feels too soon. Maybe that's because it feels like you're losing. You're letting go of that person is losing them all over again. Or maybe it's just because you're depressed, and depression has a way of preserving itself and continuing itself. But ultimately you have to let go, and in a sense that's what we just did by setting off those train cars. And I like that one of the dead is helping us. The ghost comes and goes, it's a bunch of different ghosts, but it's still essentially the same ghost. And I like that. We could read it as this notion that, our past experiences of death, or someone who has past experience dealing with death, can help us. Or we could read it as, mourning isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it sucks while you're doing it, but it's a measure of having cared about another person. Any kind of relationship with another person is going to involve pain, and mourning is just one example of that. And that pain becomes a measure of caring. And in a sense, we can take life from that, he said, as Sabin eats the food of the dead. And Cian is hesitant, because of course he is. He's not ready to draw life and strength from the experiences of his past. He's not ready to say, yes, this loss happened, but it was part of the relationship I had with this person, and I can draw from that. I can go on with my life altered by the experience, but ultimately bettered by it. He's not ready for that, and it's okay for him to not be ready for that. That's a hard thing to accept, that your losses shape who you are. So Sabin can eat because he's had time. Cian, no. So the Whispers are pretty obviously, like, evil ghosts. As are, I forget if they're called phantoms or ghosts, but the ghost enemies are clearly as well. I'm still really curious about those wizard dudes. Are they necromancers? Are they some kind of, I don't know, demonic creature that harries the dead? This. Okay, so this little sequence is a mess, and I freely admit that. Here's what's going on here. This was supposed to be our first encounter with a recurring nemesis. Not Siegfried, but there was supposed to be a recurring enemy, sort of like minor recurring boss, like Ultros, who would take the form of other people. First he would attack Siegfried, later in the game we would encounter him in the form of members of our own party. Oh, this is beautiful. This is the absolute perfect way for this fight to go. Greatest swordsman in the world, he says. He doesn't hurt any of us and our dog defeats him. Anyway, the plan, the original intent, was that there would be this whole sequence of people fighting us, our own party members, other major NPCs, that kind of thing, all leading up to the reveal that it was Gogo, who's a character that shows up much later in the game and is a shapeshifter who copies others. And the idea was that this would be like a hidden secret character, and you would have to do this whole lengthy chain of things across the whole game to get him to join your party. As basically an Easter egg, or a hidden character. This did not pan out. What they ended up going with instead is that there's a hidden dungeon that you can access late in the game that gives you, if you defeat the dungeon, go through it all, at the end of it you get to talk to Gogo and he joins your party. Much simpler than the original plan. For whatever reason, they left in this encounter with Siegfried. Now, I don't know exactly where the Siegfried thing came from. Unless I'm much mistaken, Siegfried and Siegfried would be written differently in Japanese, so it might have been introduced by translator. It might have been in the original. Maybe the plan was that Gogo would get the names slightly wrong, and that's how you would know that it wasn't him, or that it wasn't them. I don't know. But it's an interesting idea anyway. And it's actually kind of cool that in this spiritual journey we encounter a shapeshifter. Because that is a thing in kind of some esoteric philosophies, sort of religions. Things like the Golden Dawn, that kind of stuff. Occult kind of stuff. There is this idea of, while you're on a spiritual journey, there's a descent into the abyss. That is the most dangerous and important part of the journey. And in the course of that, you encounter a formless being, something that can take on any shape, and you have to fight it. Crowley calls it Choronzon. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, it might be Choronzon. And the idea is that this is the illusions of the world. This is the idea of solidity and materiality and order, that these things are lies, and you need to overcome them by journeying through the abyss. And I think here we have these characters basically doing this notion of the journey through the abyss. And this is part of it. That's where this train goes. Is, the abyss, the afterlife, Hades, hell, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, the boss is coming up, so I'm going to use my one tent here. I'm pretty sure there's a shop not very long after this boss fight. But yeah. I am virtually certain that everything I just talked about for the last 20 minutes is unintentional. I think the intent was to have Cian encounter this place of death immediately after losing his family. I think, the notion of a train that carries people to the afterlife, basically they're like, well, that's cool. Everything else is me reading into it, but who cares? It works, and I think it enriches the game to kind of look at it this way. Now, I mentioned before about a psychopomp. Someone who guides and protects the dead on their journey. It's the train. One of my favorite reveals in video games ever is that the train is, well, alive isn't quite the right word, but sapient, and does not like us living folks meddling. Okay, and here it comes, the most famous moment in this game. I put it in the opening. It's wonderful and bizarre and amazing. Sabin suplexes a train. But I honestly think even better than the fact that he just suplexed the locomotive, an undead locomotive at that, is that we're running on the tracks from a train having a battle. This is the ridiculousness of the RPG genre at its finest. I'm pretty sure that wheel attack is meant to symbolize it, running us over. I'm not quite sure why it has acid rain, but I guess coal-fired trains pollute? And it does a lot of damage! But it doesn't last very long, This fight is, a DPS race? I mean, it makes total sense that running on the tracks from a train having a battle would be a very short fight with big damage numbers, but the boss has low HP. That's very well done. And now this part. This is what everything I was talking about has been building up to. This is the journey. And part of the journey of mourning is saying goodbye. It's not the end of the journey. It's honestly closer to the first step of the journey. But you do have to say goodbye. And Cian didn't really get the chance. I mean, he sort of did, because they weren't quite dead when he found them. But sometimes it takes more than one goodbye. And he needs this. What I find interesting is that all the people we saw die in Doma were soldiers. But none of the people we see boarding the train are. This is all the people that weren't shown before, because what we saw before were the people Cian knew, which was mostly soldiers. Here, we see everyone else in the castle. We see the people who kept the stables, the people who cleaned the floors, the people who cooked the food. And I like that we get to see them. I like that the game actually shows that they exist for once. And perhaps this is what Cian needed. It's not the opportunity for him to say goodbye, but to hear them say goodbye to him. Most of us aren't lucky enough to get that. And then the game just sits here for a while. You can talk to Shadow. He gives you good advice. Cian needs to be alone right now. Shadow knows. Shadow's been here. And the game just sits here, silent, letting that moment hang till it fades away. I guess I didn't notice I picked up another tent somewhere along the way. And after all that, we get attacked by a bunch of cats. I don't know. Okay, I like that Interceptor came out to attack one. That's cute. I find it interesting that there's, just past the gateway, past the Phantom Forest and the train to the Land of the Dead, there's a lot of stray cats. It's actually a little disturbing once you start thinking about it, because Doma's been at war with the Empire for a while. This was the final siege. That's not where the war starts. That's where the war ends. Are these the cats of all the farmers and stuff that the Empire, killed? These are the cats belonging to all of those people who just saw board that train. And now they've gone stray because there's nobody to feed them anymore. I mean, it's kind of an ugly thought, but it fits? Okay, so we've confronted, kind of, part of the journey. We've taken the train. But, at least in some schools of thought, there's another thing you have to do on the spiritual journey. You have to take a leap of faith. You have to throw yourself into the future and accept that you are not entirely in control of your destiny. And Shadow can't do it. This is the absolute guaranteed spot where Shadow leaves. I mentioned last time that he can leave almost any time during this segment of the game. If he doesn't leave randomly before this, he will always leave here, because he cannot take that leap of faith. Because he doesn't have any left. He, therefore, will remain trapped forever in this Land of the Dead, in this world of mourning. We, on the other hand, are able to take that leap of faith and punch fish. Okay, it's not a perfect metaphor, and, the fact that this is an RPG gets a little bit in the way, but the idea is there, that we have to fling ourselves into the unknown as part of becoming the new person that we're going to be going forward. Because I mentioned before about all these characters being, traumatized. They all have this defining trauma. And one of the things about trauma is that it shatters your identity. It separates you into a before and an after. And this is them flinging themselves into the after with the awareness that it's a terrifying plunge. But it's the only way to move on. It's the only way to continue forward, is to accept that and shoot fish with laser beams out of their hands. This is a really cool sequence, just, straining the metaphor beside, this is a really cool sequence. This is not like anything I had seen in an RPG before this. This kind of continuing dynamic fight with new enemies hopping in, and the moving backgrounds. It's very cool. Here's the boss. It feels weird to have a fish throwing lightning at us, but I guess that's basically what electric eels do, so... Alright. I have no idea what a Rhizopass is, but... Sure. It's a purple electric piranha. I'll accept that. Oh, hey, his counterattack actually worked. That was a much less damaging boss than the Train of the Dead. So now what? We've flung ourselves into the future. What happens now? And the answer is Sabin floating down a river, because that is the end-all and be-all of Sabin's existence. That is, no matter what Sabin does, he'll always end up floating down a river. But at least there's some really heartbreaking cello music. I actually really like Gao's theme. It's one of the best character themes, and it is underappreciated, I feel. But yeah, Gao. This is an interesting trio we get now. Shadow leaves, Gao comes in, and what we now have is Gao was abandoned by his father. Xian has just lost his child, and Sabin lost father, and in a sense at the same time he lost his brother because of running away. These characters fill the holes in each other's lives. Not perfectly. Nobody ever fills the hole perfectly. But it's hard to imagine three more perfect people to help one another. I mean, Gao's hair even looks enormously like Sabin's. It's a little bit grayer, browner, I guess. And this sucks. Gao showing up after every fight on the Veldt means that this first time you basically have to smack him in the face and make him go away. Which I don't like doing, but there's not really any alternative. Anyway, you notice his hair even looks a lot like Sabin's. I'm not suggesting that they're related in some way. I'm just saying that it's very easy for them to form a connection. They're the Ponytail family. Bring Xian in as well. The other thing that's interesting about the Veldt is it's implied to be this strange sort of place that calls all the monsters of the world to it. And it's thus very interesting to me that our party ends up drawn there as well, by effectively chance. We had no idea where we were going. Is there something monstrous about us? And I guess that really depends on how you define monsters. I mean, we are punching a child in the face to make him go away. So there's that. But I think there's also kind of an argument to be made that we are the rejected, we are the outcasts, we are the outsiders. The martial artist without a dojo, the samurai without a lord. We have power. We are not part of the social order. We wander around, screwing with the powers that be, the Empire. I think there's a sense in which we do basically qualify as monsters. In a relatively loose definition of monster. So, it makes sense that we'd end up here. Not permanently, but it makes sense. Yeah. Ableist language aside, this is talking about Gao's father, who is the man in the house where Sabin showed up the first time he fell in a river. So a little bit of symmetry there. Let's check the shops. Let's see. Okay, improved weapons for us both. Guess I had a shield I wasn't using. Gao, you will note, cannot equip weapons. Gao can equip very little in the way of equipment. He can equip a buckler. I think that's the only shield he can equip without relic intervention. And he can equip kind of similar equipment. Okay, I'm surprised he can equip the iron helmet. I guess he can equip lots of helmets? But he can't equip heavy armor, he can only equip, like, martial artist type armor. Or monster type armor, for lack of a better term. The kind of stuff Mog equips. Because Gao is a very strange character. He's got potential to be enormously powerful if you put the work in, but it's a lot of very tedious and kind of unpredictable work. And I'm probably... There are a few ways to make him useful for the early part of the game, so I will probably attempt to do that once I get him to join me. Oh yeah, need some meat. Remember, he complained about being hungry when he encountered us before. But I don't think I'm going to keep him. Two rivers isn't enough. Sabin needs to throw himself into an ocean current as well. Dude's gonna end up with a water phobia. So, this house is a cute little thing. This is sort of a messenger guy. Oh, this isn't what I was expecting. I was expecting this house to be something else. No, this is just where people send messages, I guess. I'm surprised every town doesn't have one. But I guess they use homing pigeons. Oh, okay, this is the house I was thinking of with the wounded soldier. I'm curious who he's a soldier for. I actually kind of like that it's not really clear. He has a girlfriend in Miranda, which is part of the Empire, but it's a recently conquered part of the Empire. So maybe he's a Mirandan soldier? Oh. Okay, so the game does tell you. I misremembered. So he was forcibly conscripted by the Imperial armor, and then they severely injured him when he tried to defect. Lovely. You know, from someone whose town was seized. I get the impression that Miranda is the last town on the continent that the Empire comes from, that they conquered. Last independent town. And after they conquered it, fairly recently, is when they started moving on Doma and Figaro and Narshe as kind of their next targets for conquest. Dwayne and Katarine. Two teenagers in love. At this point in the game, they're completely random NPCs, but they actually become fairly important later on. So I like that they get this kind of low-key introduction now. Also, that free... Oh, I'm out of money. Wonderful. And like I was saying, that kind of free shop is going to be... Or not shop, free opportunity to rest. It's something I'm going to be coming back to a lot once I have an airship, because it's free, and later in the game, it'll still be there when a lot of other things are gone. So yeah, the Veld. You can be attacked randomly by almost any enemy you fought previously, and then Gao shows up after the fights. But, since he complains about being hungry, we have dried meat to feed him. There it is. And all is instantly forgiven, because food. Which I can understand. When you're hungry and somebody feeds you, that you are grateful. That is they are friends and can be trusted. And immediately, like, Gao and Sabin are acting like squabbling brothers. I do like that this scrawny, underfed kid is able to keep up with the elite, highly trained master martial artist. Even play around with him a little bit. Because, you know, he's been living among the monsters and learning their ways. He has a lot of potential to him. And, I mean, look at the two of them facing each other. They're mirrors of each other. And Xian, being the dad, you know, breaks up the squabbling. Not very successfully, because Gao is a bratty child. This scene goes on a little too long. But I do like how understanding Sabin is. This is another one of those little hints that there's more to him than the quote-unquote musclehead. There's a sensitivity here. He's just been on kind of a profound spiritual journey with Xian, and is a little protective of him because he sees Xian's loss and Xian's pain, even though Xian tries pretty hard, I think, to hide it. His reaction here is cute. It's really weird to me that, like, Woolsey is making fun of his own bad job of writing early modern English. Like, does he know that he's messing it up? Is it on purpose? I don't know. Okay, I played through this game I don't know how many times as a child, and it was years before I realized that Gao is actually making a map here. Xian is the spot in the river where we started, Sabin is the town of Moblis, and Gao is Crescent Mountain. They form a triangle. He's showing us that, and I never ever got that until, you know, a couple years ago. So, Gao is interesting. Like Celeste, he's a new mechanic. It's not something that's showed up in the games before. And it's a little bit odd. Really rather complicated. So, they give us this imp to explain it. I do like that it's not Mog this time. It's a Kappa instead, because Moogles are cute, fuzzy, they don't really register as monstrous. While an imp, a Kappa, is more of a monster. I mean, it's fairly cute because that's the art style, but Kappas in general are monsters. Fairly dangerous ones if you don't know how to deal with them. In folklore, I mean. So yeah, Gao has a limited pool of armors he can use, he can't use weapons at all, and he has these rages, which he learns by leaping onto enemies on the veldt. He can only leap on the veldt, but he can rage anywhere. Okay, yeah, he's got a fairly limited pool of them, but there's a whole lot more throughout the game. I think what I'm going to do, because I was a little short on money for getting the stuff I wanted, and there are, like I said, a couple of early game rages that are worth getting for portions of the game where you're forced to use Gao. So what I think I'm going to do is spend some time acquiring money and learning rages for Gao, and then move on with the game. So with that in mind, probably will, cut the video and come back when I'm done. And we're back. I've learned a few key rages for Gau, I've bought some equipment, and I am ready to move on to Crescent Mountain and the next part of the game. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I really love the Veldt theme as well. This segment of the game just has some really good music to it. Most of the game has really good music to it, but this segment particularly so. So, let's try out some of those rages. I think I'll start with Stray Cat, which is pretty good. It has a 50-50... Well, yeah, you just saw. It has a 50-50 chance of either doing a normal attack or that Cat Scratch move, which does, I think, 4 times normal damage. It's pretty potent. And you'll know, yeah, once you rage, that's it. For the rest of the fight, or until he dies, Gau is uncontrollable. He just keeps using the rage. Because, well, rage. I guess it's kind of this game's take on Berserker kind of a thing. Which makes some sense. Berserk comes from Bearsark, bearskin. The idea was that was these warriors that wore the skins of bears and took on the ferocity and power of a bear when they raged. And that's basically what's going on with Gau here, is he's taking on the ferocity of the creatures of the Veldt. And I overshot the mountain. Where did it go? No, I think I'm too far west. And really is literally any enemy, Ghosts, bombs. I think they have, predetermined combinations, so you won't see enemies from 2 different parts of the game showing up together, but you can get any enemy that you fought before, including some of the bosses, eventually. I distinctly remember encountering the White Dragon, on the Veldt, or the Ice Dragon, I forget which. Okay, yeah, that's another one. The Templar can use fire too, which is a very powerful spell at this point in the game, and it's more powerful than anything Terra has access to. Gau's stats aren't the best, but for this point in the game, that doesn't matter, given him being able to jump that far forward in terms of spell availability. So yeah, Gau has some good stuff if you know what it is. It's just a pain in the butt to find, and then you have to randomly encounter that enemy on the Veldt and jump on them. So he's kind of a pain to build up, but can be very powerful once you do. Sadly, he's also kind of annoying in character because of things like this. He's shown us to the cave, but he can't tell us where the thing is, so we have to search for it. So this is going to be a thing of going a few steps and then getting the characters, I don't know. I just find it very annoying. I find everything involving Gau to be kind of drawn out. I'm sympathetic to the fact that it sucks to be Gau. But, stuff like this. Him pulling potentially lethal pranks. I'm pretty sure that just actually cost us 500 GP. I mean, I like that it gives us an opportunity to see Cian parenting a little bit, just there where he interceded, but mostly it's just annoying. At least we eventually found it, and it's the underwater breathing apparatus that was mentioned in town that allows us to use the Serpent Trench, so that's cool. Gao is, necessary to progress in the game. He's just kind of a pain in the butt, both to use to build up to the level where he's useful, and story-wise. He's had a crappy life, but he was abandoned. He's a feral child, but I just find him annoying. You see, like this, okay, he's afraid of the water. Is that supposed to be funny? Mostly it just slows things down. It feels like padding to me. And I guess maybe that's just because it's characterization for a character I don't care about. It's kind of a feedback loop. I don't care about him. I don't like him, so I don't care about him. So I don't care about his characterization. So I find the segments of the game that do that annoying. So I don't like him. Yeah, Trillium knows Bio, which is another very powerful spell for this point in the game. I'm not really clear on what those things we're fighting are. Are they lumps of coral? Those red tubes that have tube worms in them? Don't know. Maybe Action means something. Actanion. Aspic is interesting because that implies a kinship between that thing and the jelly enemies that don't show up much in this game, but show up in a lot of other Final Fantasies. The blobby creatures, oftentimes they will multiply in response to being attacked with normal weapons. And of course, Aspic is, I believe, something you use in making, like, jellies and jams. Anyway, this is a nice little sequence, guided, kind of an on-rails thing like the river, but the choices are, you have limited time to make them, so that's a bit of a difference. It means you have to pay attention. The angle forms actually look really cool. I like how the angle forms look. They kind of look like sea serpent with anglerfish face. I believe we're nearing the end of this. Is there any way to get that treasure chest? I don't think there is. I think it requires taking a different branch. Oh well. Or maybe it's right here? Nope. I like those drain type puzzles. I like that we have... Oh, there it is. I like that we just jump down the drain. Oh, Green Beret, that's that good hat, but I think I already have them. Right, did I pick up something better? I don't remember. Point is, I don't think I really need it. But treasure is treasure, I guess. Another bit of very nice music, too, by the way. I like that it doesn't get interrupted by the fight theme. And for the third time, I guess third time's the charm, Sabin wakes up on the edge of the water. So, we're now effectively at the end of Sabin's plotline. All that's left to do is get a ship. Oh yeah, here we go. This is more of the story of Gao. I kind of like this way of telling his defining trauma as well, that it's kind of hinted at and pieced together from various clues. Oh, licentious howler. That's terrible, yet also wonderful. Cian's freaking out in general is just fun here. But anyway, like I was saying, we're effectively done with Cian's plotline here. All I have to do is get a ship to Figaro, and we're done. Which, that ship, where I just was, Cian's in dad mode again. That ship where I just was is the way to do that. So, I actually really like this. I was talking before about how trauma shatters your identity. And that's kind of what's going on here, is our party has been shattered by our encounters with the Empire. And now we've gone on this kind of spiritual journey as Sabin and Cian, and now Gao, where we've passed through this liminal space and dealt with death and loss, and flung ourselves through the leap of faith into the abyss, and passed through the other side, and found people to fill holes that other people left in our lives. And now we can reintegrate. We can bring the entire party back together again. So I'm just trying to look to make sure that I have equipment for everyone. Now that we've done all that, we can be whole once more. And that means bringing the party back together to be whole again. Got that. That's new. Now I'm just talking to people. It's not how it works, kid. Yeah. And the news has spread here, Doma is gone. Which means effectively everywhere we've heard of except Narshe has fallen to the Empire. Nowhere else is free. We're gonna have to do something about that. So yeah, that's the game telling us you gotta get on a ship to proceed. But I just want to explore a little bit more, make sure I don't miss anything, because this is not a town that you come back to much. There we go. Would have missed that elixir. Or at least had to wait till much later in the game to get it. I think that's just about... yeah, everything. Oh. Did not realize that it would let me leave that way. Alright, well, I think I'm going to save here. Alright. Let's head on out of here. You're in my way, sir. Get out of my way. Okay. Let's take that ship. Yes, it is. Well, we happen to know that they did. So, I think gonna call the episode here. Next time, we'll continue with, well, the reunion of the party. See you all then.